Welcome to Buddhist Balance, where wisdom, mindfulness, and personal growth meet. I'm so glad you're here, and I want to invite you on a journey of deep reflection and transformation. Today, we're diving into the heart of Buddhist teachings, exploring timeless insights that can guide us toward a life of inner peace and fulfillment. In this video, we'll break down profound lessons from the Buddha himself, focusing on the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and the Five Precepts, fundamental principles that have the power to reshape our lives. These teachings aren't just ancient wisdom, they are practical, actionable steps that anyone can apply in their everyday life, no matter where they are on their spiritual journey. Whether you're new to Buddhism or have been on this path for years, I'm confident that you'll find insights that resonate deeply. But here's the thing, this isn't just about listening. It's about engaging with the teachings, reflecting on them, and integrating them into your own life. I encourage you to pause, take notes, and share your thoughts with me in the comments section. How do these teachings show up in your life? What challenges are you facing? Let's start a conversation, because your experiences could be just the insight someone else needs to hear today. If you're ready to explore these teachings, transform your mindset, and discover deeper meaning in your life, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Buddhist Balance for more content like this. I'm thrilled to be part of your journey. 1. Life involves suffering, dukkha. The first of Buddha's Four Noble Truths is the recognition that life involves suffering, often referred to as dukkha in Pali. Buddha didn't sugarcoat life's challenges. He acknowledged that suffering is an inescapable part of the human condition. But this truth is not meant to be depressing or cynical, rather, it's a wake-up call, an invitation to see life as it truly is. Buddha's concept of suffering extends beyond physical pain or sadness. It includes the existential struggles we face every day, feelings of dissatisfaction, discomfort, frustration, and loss. Dukkha encompasses the inevitable disappointments we experience when things don't go as planned, the pain that comes with separation from loved ones, and the sorrow that arises when we are faced with death or other profound losses. But what Buddha understood that many people don't is that suffering isn't just an isolated experience, it's universal. We all experience it, at different times and in different forms. From the loss of a loved one to the frustration of unfulfilled desires, suffering takes on many shapes. Life, by its very nature, is impermanent, constantly changing. And it's this very impermanence that gives rise to suffering. The reality of suffering. One key element of Buddha's teaching is that suffering is universal. It's not a sign that we are doing something wrong, nor is it a form of punishment. Suffering is just part of the human experience. Everyone, no matter their status, wealth, or situation, experiences suffering. The rich, the poor, the powerful, the powerless, everyone faces it. Buddha's approach wasn't to ask us to avoid suffering or wish it away. Instead, he wanted us to understand it and approach it with mindfulness and acceptance. Famous example, Steve Jobs. Take Steve Jobs, for instance. Jobs achieved incredible success with Apple. revolutionizing personal technology. But his life was not without suffering. Despite his remarkable achievements, he faced numerous setbacks, including a highly publicized firing from his own company in 1985. Later in life, he was diagnosed with cancer. Yet, even during his battle with illness, Jobs found peace in embracing the impermanence of life. In his famous 2005 Stanford commencement address, Jobs shared how his diagnosis of cancer made him reflect on life's fragility. He said, "Your work is going to fill a large part of your life. And the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do." Steve Jobs came to terms with the fact that suffering is a part of life and used it as motivation to live with purpose. His suffering didn't define him, it helped him redefine how he approached his work and his relationships. Why suffering is inevitable. Buddha's insight into suffering lies in his understanding of impermanence. The idea that everything in life is transient. From the things we possess to the relationships we cherish. Nothing lasts forever. This constant change leads to dukkha because we become attached to things that are fleeting. Whether it's a favorite item we lose or a dream that doesn't come true. We experience suffering because we cling to something that was never meant to last. Take, for example, the experience of changing seasons. Each season brings something beautiful and new. But as one season transitions into another, there is an inevitable sense of loss. When we cling to the warmth of summer or the colors of fall, we may feel sadness or resistance as winter approaches. The same applies to life. When we resist change, we encounter suffering. Buddha's first truth teaches us that suffering is not something to avoid but something to recognize and accept. Famous example, Bruce Lee. Consider the life of Bruce Lee, a martial artist and philosopher who lived by the principles of impermanence and adaptability. Lee was known not only for his physical prowess but for his profound wisdom on the nature of life and change. In his personal life, he suffered tremendous hardship, including physical injury that threatened his career and his ability to continue teaching martial arts. But rather than dwelling on his suffering, Lee embraced it. His famous quote, "Absorb what is useful. Discard what is not. Add what is uniquely your own," is a reflection of his understanding of impermanence. He understood that suffering is a natural part of the process of growth. By adapting to change and letting go of rigid attachments to his identity or career, he was able to transcend suffering and live fully in the present moment. Personal reflection. For many of us, the idea that suffering is a fundamental part of life is not easy to accept. It's easy to think of suffering as something wrong that happens to us. But Buddha's teaching flips this idea. Suffering is not the exception, it's the rule. The sooner we recognize this, the sooner we can begin to find peace amidst it. Think about your own life. Perhaps you're currently going through a difficult situation. An argument with a loved one. Disappointment in your career. Or the grief of losing someone. These struggles feel personal. And they certainly hurt. But Buddha's insight tells us that we are not alone in this. Everyone suffers. Everyone goes through pain. It's part of being human. The first noble truth isn't meant to depress us, it's meant to liberate us. When we realize that suffering is part of the universal experience, We no longer have to feel isolated or like something is wrong with us when we experience pain. Suffering doesn't define us, it's simply part of the journey. In this first truth, Buddha shows us that suffering is not a mistake or something we should try to escape. It's part of life. And it's through accepting this reality that we begin to gain wisdom and clarity. By accepting the truth of dukkha, we stop resisting and start learning how to navigate the ups and downs of life with greater ease. 2. The cause of suffering is attachment, tanha. The second of Buddha's Four Noble Truths is that the cause of suffering is attachment, known as tanha in Pali. Buddha didn't just identify suffering as a problem. He went deeper, pinpointing its root cause, our attachment to things, people, and even ideas. This attachment creates a cycle of craving and dissatisfaction that traps us in a constant state of longing, fear, and frustration. Understanding attachment, tanha. At its core, tanha refers to the craving or desire we have for things, experiences, or states of being that we believe will bring us happiness or fulfillment. These desires often focus on external things, material possessions, relationships, status, success, but they can also apply to internal states, like the need for approval, certainty, or a fixed sense of identity. Buddha taught that it is not the things we desire that cause suffering, but our attachment to them. This attachment creates a mindset where we believe that our happiness depends on acquiring or maintaining these things. The more strongly we attach ourselves to something, the more we suffer when it changes or is taken away. Attachment to material possessions. Take, for example, the way we often attach ourselves to material possessions. In today's consumer-driven society, we are bombarded with messages telling us that we need more things to be happy, whether it's the latest phone, a bigger house, or a stylish wardrobe. We chase after these possessions, believing that once we acquire them, we'll feel more complete or more secure. But the reality is different. As soon as we acquire what we desire, it's not long before the novelty wears off, and we find ourselves wanting something else. Famous example, the story of Alexander the Great. Consider the story of Alexander the Great, one of history's most famous conquerors. Alexander, after years of conquest, had amassed an enormous empire. Yet he was never content. He was constantly seeking more lands, more power, more validation. Even on his deathbed, he is said to have declared that he had no heirs worthy of his empire and left his wealth to be divided. Despite his incredible success and wealth, Alexander's attachment to power and glory left him restless and dissatisfied. His life illustrates the very point Buddha made: the more we attach ourselves to external achievements or possessions, the more we create an endless cycle of desire, and with it, suffering. Attachment to people and relationships. Another common attachment is to people. We often tie our happiness to others' behavior or approval. We crave affection, validation, and love from others. And when those relationships become strained, or when we face rejection, we experience immense pain. Think about how many of us hold on tightly to relationships that no longer serve us, believing that without those connections, we are incomplete or unworthy. We may fear being alone, So we hold on to toxic relationships out of a sense of attachment. This fear of abandonment and the desperation to keep people in our lives often leads to suffering. Famous example, the life of Princess Diana. Consider the life of Princess Diana, who was beloved around the world for her charity work and her personal struggles with love and identity. Diana's attachment to her own sense of royal duty and to the expectations of others, particularly in her marriage, led to tremendous emotional suffering. Her sense of self was deeply intertwined with her role as a mother and a princess. But this attachment ultimately led her to a place of great internal conflict and pain. Her tragic death is a somber reminder of how attachment to external roles and expectations can create suffering. Attachment to our own identity and expectations. Even more subtly, we often become attached to our identity, the way we see ourselves and the labels we place on ourselves. We define who we are by our careers, our successes, our appearance, and our personal achievements. But when these aspects of our identity are threatened, we suffer. Think about the person who defines themselves by their job title. When they lose their job, they don't just lose a source of income, they lose their sense of identity, leading to a deep feeling of worthlessness or fear. Similarly, people who identify strongly with their physical appearance may experience a sense of devastation when they begin to age or face changes in their body. Famous example, the story of Muhammad Ali. One powerful example of attachment to identity can be seen in the life of Muhammad Ali. Ali was one of the greatest boxers of all time. But his identity was wrapped up in his ability to fight, to be the best, and to remain undefeated. Later in life, Ali was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, which stripped him of his physical abilities. At first, he struggled with this new reality. He couldn't reconcile his identity as a fighter with his condition. However, over time, Ali learned to detach from his old self-image and embraced a new purpose, advocating for Parkinson's disease awareness. His ability to detach from his identity as the greatest boxer allowed him to find new meaning and peace in his life, despite the physical suffering he endured. How attachment creates suffering. When we cling to anything, whether it's an object, a person, or even an identity, Buddha taught that we set ourselves up for suffering. Why? Because nothing in life is permanent. The world is in constant flux, and change is inevitable. The more attached we are to things, the greater the suffering when those things change or disappear. This cycle of attachment and loss is what creates suffering. We want something. We get it. And we enjoy it for a time, but because we're attached, we can't bear the thought of losing it. And when it's inevitably taken away, whether through loss, change, or death, we experience grief, anxiety, and fear. Famous example, the life of Leonardo da Vinci. A historical example of attachment and the suffering it causes can be seen in the life of Leonardo da Vinci. As a Renaissance man, Da Vinci had many incredible achievements. But his attachment to perfection often prevented him from completing his works. He started many projects but left them unfinished. Not because he didn't have the ability, but because he was attached to the idea of creating something flawless. His struggle with attachment to perfection and fear of failure caused him significant stress and dissatisfaction. It wasn't until he released that attachment to an idealized version of his work that he could finally find peace with his creations. The path to freedom from attachment. The good news is that, according to Buddha, we can free ourselves from attachment. It's not about denying desires or becoming indifferent, it's about developing a sense of awareness, mindfulness, and letting go of the tight grip we have on things. When we detach from the need for constant validation or external possessions, we create space for true peace and contentment. Personal reflection. Think about your own life. What are you attached to? It could be a person, a job, a possession, or even a particular way of thinking. Now, reflect on how your attachment to that thing has shaped your happiness. Have you ever felt stressed or anxious because of something you were holding onto too tightly? By practicing mindfulness and awareness, we can begin to loosen our attachment to things. We can learn to appreciate the fleeting nature of life without clinging to it. Buddha's teaching on Tanha is a powerful reminder that the key to freedom is not in grasping more, but in letting go. When we free ourselves from attachment, we find that the peace we seek was inside us all along. Buddha's second noble truth teaches us that attachment is the root cause of suffering. By learning to let go of our attachments, we begin to reduce the hold that craving has over us. We can then move toward greater peace, wisdom, and joy, no longer trapped by the endless cycle of wanting and losing. 3. There is an end to suffering, Nirvana. The third of Buddha's Four Noble Truths brings us the most profound and liberating insight. There is an end to suffering, known as Nirvana. While the first two truths reveal the nature and cause of suffering, this third truth offers the ultimate solution, a state of freedom, peace, and liberation from the cycle of suffering that defines the human condition. Nirvana represents the end of the cycle of craving, attachment, and suffering. And it is the state of true enlightenment and spiritual awakening that Buddha himself achieved. What is Nirvana? Nirvana is often misunderstood in popular culture as a kind of heavenly paradise or eternal state of bliss. However, Buddha's concept of Nirvana is much more nuanced. It is not a place, but a state of being, a profound inner peace and freedom from the causes of suffering. Nirvana is not something external, but rather a mental and spiritual condition. It is the cessation of craving, hatred, and ignorance, which are the root causes of all suffering. To understand Nirvana, we must first understand what it isn't. Nirvana does not mean the cessation of all feelings or experiences. It's not about becoming numb or detached from life. Rather, it's about transcending the mental and emotional patterns that lead to suffering. It's about living with an awareness that allows us to accept life as it is, without resistance or attachment. In Nirvana, one experiences life without the inner turmoil that comes from constant desire, fear, or regret. Nirvana as liberation. Nirvana is often described as liberation, the release from the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, samsara. In Buddhist philosophy, all sentient beings are trapped in samsara, constantly cycling through lives and experiences, driven by desire, attachment, and ignorance. This cycle leads to suffering, as we are bound by our cravings and aversions, unable to break free. The ultimate goal of Buddhism is to reach a state of liberation from this cycle, Nirvana. Achieving nirvana means that one has extinguished the mental afflictions that keep us bound to samsara. It is the ultimate freedom, freedom from the cycle of birth and death, freedom from suffering, and freedom from the delusions that cloud our perception of reality. Famous example: the story of the Buddha's enlightenment. To understand nirvana, one need only look at the story of Siddhartha Gautama, the man who became the Buddha. Siddhartha was born into a life of luxury and privilege. But as he grew older, he encountered the harsh realities of life, old age, sickness, and death. These experiences shook him deeply, prompting him to search for the truth about the nature of suffering and how to overcome it. He spent years in deep meditation, renouncing worldly pleasures and seeking wisdom. Eventually, under the Bodhi tree, he achieved enlightenment, which is described as his attainment of nirvana. In that moment, he realized the true nature of existence and saw that suffering could be ended. Buddha was liberated from the cycle of samsara. And in that freedom, he found a profound peace that he later shared with the world. The role of mindfulness in achieving nirvana. One of the key aspects of achieving nirvana is mindfulness, the practice of being fully present and aware in each moment. Mindfulness allows us to observe our thoughts, emotions, and desires without becoming attached to them. Instead of reacting out of fear, greed, or anger, mindfulness enables us to respond with wisdom and compassion. Buddha's teachings on mindfulness are central to his path of enlightenment. By practicing mindfulness in all areas of life, we begin to develop insight into the nature of suffering and the impermanent nature of all things. This insight gradually weakens our attachment to the things that cause us pain, leading us closer to the realization of nirvana. Famous example: the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism, is a modern example of someone who embodies the principles of mindfulness and the pursuit of nirvana. Despite facing immense suffering throughout his life, particularly in his exile from Tibet, and his people's suffering under Chinese rule, he has remained an embodiment of compassion, wisdom, and inner peace. His life is a testament to the possibility of achieving inner peace even amidst great adversity. The Dalai Lama has often spoken of the importance of mindfulness and compassion in creating peace, both within oneself and in the world. His ability to maintain a sense of tranquility and joy despite external circumstances is a direct reflection of his practice of mindfulness and his alignment with the teachings of nirvana, the liberation of letting go. A critical component of achieving nirvana is the practice of letting go, releasing our attachment to desires, fears, and expectations. Nirvana is not something we can attain in the traditional sense, rather, it's something we realize when we stop clinging to the illusion of control. As long as we hold on to the idea that we can control everything around us, our relationships, our success, our possessions, we remain trapped in suffering. Letting go is not about passivity or indifference, it's about realizing that we don't need to control everything. When we stop fighting against life's inevitable changes and instead flow with them, we experience peace. This is the essence of nirvana, peace in acceptance, freedom in letting go, and liberation from the mental and emotional patterns that keep us locked in suffering. Famous example: Nelson Mandela. Consider the life of Nelson Mandela. the South African leader who spent 27 years in prison for his opposition to apartheid. Mandela's journey to freedom wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Despite his long imprisonment, Mandela never allowed his suffering to define him. Upon his release, rather than seeking vengeance, he chose the path of reconciliation and forgiveness. Mandela's ability to let go of bitterness and hatred, and to forgive his captors, is a powerful example of liberation. He realized that holding on to anger and resentment would only perpetuate his suffering. His ability to let go of attachment to vengeance and instead embrace the idea of forgiveness is a reflection of the liberating power of the teachings of Nirvana. Personal reflection. Reflecting on the concept of Nirvana. It's important to understand that it's not something we achieve through force or striving. Nirvana is not an external goal but an internal state. It is the result of living with wisdom, mindfulness, and compassion. It is the cessation of suffering and the experience of true peace. Think about your own life. Have you ever experienced moments of deep peace and clarity, when everything just seemed to fall into place? Perhaps it was a moment of deep meditation or a time when you let go of something you had been holding on to for a long time. Those moments, however fleeting, are glimpses of what Nirvana can feel like. Nirvana isn't something that happens all at once, it's a gradual process of releasing attachment and embracing the present moment. As you reflect on your own journey, ask yourself, what am I holding on to? What desires, fears, or expectations am I clinging to that cause me suffering? By practicing mindfulness and letting go of attachment, we can start to experience more peace and freedom in our lives, bringing us closer to the ultimate goal of Nirvana. The third noble truth, that there is an end to suffering, gives us hope and direction. It shows us that suffering is not a permanent condition. By practicing mindfulness, letting go of attachments, and living with wisdom and compassion, we can gradually transcend suffering and experience a life of true peace and freedom. 4. The path to the end of suffering, the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is the path that leads to the end of suffering. This is the practical aspect of Buddha's teachings. The Eightfold Path is not just theory, it is a way of life that helps us live with ethics, mental discipline, and wisdom. While the first three noble truths help us understand suffering and its cause, the Eightfold Path provides the method for overcoming suffering. It is the guide to achieving Nirvana. The 8 components of the path. The Eightfold Path consists of 3 main categories: wisdom, prajna; ethical conduct, sila; and mental discipline, samadhi. Each of these principles is interconnected and supports each other in our spiritual development. Let's take a closer look at each of these 8 principles. 1. Right understanding, samadhi. The first step in the Eightfold Path is right understanding. This means having a correct understanding of the nature of reality, specifically understanding the 4 noble truths and the impermanent nature of life. To cultivate right understanding, we need to develop wisdom and insight into how suffering arises and how to end it. Right understanding is not just theoretical knowledge but also a deep experiential understanding gained through meditation and reflection. Famous example, Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi is a perfect example of right understanding. His commitment to nonviolence and truth was rooted in his deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all beings. Gandhi's spiritual practices, including meditation, helped him gain an understanding of truth that was both practical and lived out in his actions. 2. Right intention, Samma Sankappa. The second step is right intention. This involves cultivating pure and wholesome intentions aligned with the path of enlightenment. Right intention is about developing the right mental attitude to act with compassion, kindness, and wisdom, instead of acting out of selfish desire, hatred, or delusion. Right intention requires turning away from harmful thoughts and emotions, such as greed, anger, and ignorance, and developing intentions based on generosity, loving kindness, and harmlessness. Famous example, Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa exemplified right intention in her life. Her work with the poor and the dying in Calcutta was driven by a deep sense of compassion and love. She served not for fame or recognition, but because of her genuine desire to relieve suffering and bring kindness to the world. Her life is a powerful example of the importance of right intention in transforming the world. 3. Right speech, Samavaka. The third step is right speech. This involves speaking truthfully, kindly, and constructively. Right speech requires us to avoid harmful speech such as lying, gossiping, harsh words, or divisive speech. Right speech is about speaking in a way that promotes harmony, understanding, and respect. It encourages us to speak truthfully, but with compassion. Our words are powerful, and right speech teaches us to use them wisely to promote peace and well-being. Famous example, Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. is a remarkable example of someone who practiced right speech. His speeches, particularly the "I have a dream" speech, were filled with truth, wisdom, and compassion. His words called for equality, justice, and peace, and were spoken with the intention of healing divisions and fostering understanding. 4. Right action, Samma Kammanta. The fourth step is right action. This refers to ethical conduct and living in harmony with the world around us. Right action involves refraining from harmful actions such as killing, stealing, or sexual misconduct, and instead committing to actions that benefit both oneself and others. Right action encourages us to live with moral integrity, where our actions align with our values and promote peace and well-being for all beings. Famous example, Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela provides a compelling example of right action. Despite facing immense adversity and injustice in his fight against apartheid, Mandela remained committed to peaceful resistance and reconciliation. His actions were driven by a desire for justice, not revenge. Mandela's dedication to ethical action, even at great personal cost, demonstrates the power of right action in bringing about positive change. 5. Right livelihood, Samma Ajiva. The fifth step is right livelihood. This principle encourages us to earn a living in a way that does not cause harm to others or exploit them. Right livelihood is about choosing a career or vocation that aligns with our ethical values and contributes to the welfare of society. It encourages us to avoid work that involves dishonesty, exploitation, or harm to living beings. Famous example, Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is a modern example of right livelihood. Known for his ethical approach to business, Buffett emphasizes the importance of integrity, honesty, and long-term thinking in business. He has also pledged to donate the majority of his wealth to charitable causes, showing that right livelihood is not just about making money but using wealth for the greater good. 6. Right effort, Samma Vayama. The sixth step is right effort. This involves cultivating a determined and consistent effort to develop good qualities and eliminate unwholesome ones. Right effort is about working on our minds to prevent negative thoughts from arising and to promote positive, wholesome thoughts. Right effort also involves maintaining a balanced approach, neither forcing nor overexerting ourselves, but steadily working towards personal growth and transformation. Famous example, Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, is a great example of right effort. Edison faced many failures before he succeeded, but his persistence and dedication to his work reflect the principle of right effort. Edison's work ethic shows that progress, especially in the spiritual realm, requires consistent effort and perseverance, even in the face of difficulties. 7. Right mindfulness, Samma Sati. The seventh step is right mindfulness. This involves cultivating awareness and presence in every moment. Right mindfulness is about paying attention to our thoughts, feelings, and actions, and understanding the impermanent nature of all things. Mindfulness helps us develop insight into the nature of suffering and the path to its cessation. It allows us to become aware of the habitual patterns in our minds and break free from them. Famous example, Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese Buddhist monk and mindfulness teacher, is a living example of right mindfulness. His teachings have inspired millions around the world to practice mindfulness as a way to bring peace and compassion into their lives. His life and teachings show the transformative power of mindfulness in creating a peaceful and harmonious existence. 8. Right concentration, Samma Samadhi. The eighth and final step is right concentration. This involves developing the ability to focus and concentrate the mind through meditation. Right concentration refers to the practice of cultivating deep states of mental concentration and inner peace, which lead to the development of wisdom and insight. Through right concentration, we train our minds to stay focused, quieting the distractions of daily life, and gaining clarity of insight. Meditation is the primary tool for developing right concentration and helps us attain the deep inner peace that leads to enlightenment. Famous example, the life of the Buddha. The Buddha's own life is the most profound example of right concentration. Before his enlightenment, the Buddha practiced deep meditation to understand the nature of suffering and the path to its cessation. It was through the practice of concentration and mindfulness that he attained the insight that led to his awakening. Personal reflection. As we reflect on the Eightfold Path, it becomes clear that each of these principles is interrelated and mutually supportive. It is not enough to focus on just one aspect of the path. Wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline must be practiced together, each reinforcing the other. The Eightfold Path is a holistic guide to living a life of balance, peace, and wisdom. When we apply these principles to our own lives, we begin to break free from the cycle of suffering and move closer to the state of nirvana. The journey is not always easy, but it is one that offers immense rewards: inner peace, compassion, wisdom, and a deep sense of fulfillment. By following the Eightfold Path, we can transform our minds, our actions, and our lives. We can overcome suffering and achieve the ultimate goal of enlightenment, Nirvana. It is a path that requires patience, persistence, and mindfulness. But the rewards are beyond measure. 5. The Five Precepts, ethical guidelines for living a compassionate life. In addition to the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, Buddha's teachings emphasize ethical conduct as a critical aspect of the spiritual journey. The Five Precepts are a set of ethical guidelines that serve as a foundation for living a life of compassion, wisdom, and mindfulness. These precepts are a form of personal discipline that help us to avoid actions that cause harm, and to cultivate behaviors that promote peace, harmony, and well-being. The Five Precepts are universal in nature and are not simply rules to follow. They represent a deep understanding of human nature and the impact of our actions on the world around us. They guide us to make choices that minimize suffering for ourselves and others, creating a foundation for a harmonious and compassionate life. 1. To refrain from killing or causing harm to any living being. The first precept is to refrain from killing or causing harm to any living being. This includes not only physical harm but also the intentional infliction of pain, whether through words, actions, or thoughts. The principle behind this precept is the recognition that all beings, whether human or animal, have the right to live and flourish. Buddha taught that life is sacred, and we should cultivate compassion for all living beings. The act of causing harm, whether through violence, exploitation, or cruelty, creates negative karmic consequences that perpetuate suffering, both for the person who harms and for those who are harmed. Famous example, the life of Albert Schweitzer. One of the most well-known figures who embodied this precept is Albert Schweitzer, a theologian, physician, and humanitarian. Schweitzer's philosophy of reverence for life was rooted in the belief that all living beings have inherent value. He dedicated much of his life to providing medical care to the people of Africa, and his respect for life guided his work. Schweitzer's commitment to nonviolence and compassion is an example of how one can live in alignment with this precept, contributing to the well-being of others. 2. To refrain from stealing or taking what is not given. The second precept is to refrain from stealing or taking what is not given. This precept goes beyond simply refraining from theft in the literal sense. It also involves being mindful of our actions, and ensuring that we do not exploit, manipulate, or take advantage of others. Stealing in any form, whether it is physical property, time, or emotional energy, creates imbalance and harm in relationships. When we steal or act dishonestly, we are violating the natural law of harmony and trust that is essential for peace and connection with others. Practicing this precept encourages us to be honest, generous, and responsible with what we have, and to respect the rights and possessions of others. Famous example, the life of Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, the renowned investor and philanthropist, is a modern example of living in alignment with this precept. Despite his immense wealth, Buffett is known for his ethical approach to business and investing. He has built a reputation for honesty and transparency, ensuring that his wealth is created in ways that are fair and beneficial to all. His commitment to ethical practices is in harmony with the idea of refraining from taking what is not given, demonstrating that true wealth is created through integrity and respect for others. 3. To refrain from sexual misconduct. The third precept is to refrain from sexual misconduct. This precept encourages us to engage in sexual behavior that is respectful, consensual, and loving. It discourages behaviors that exploit, harm, or objectify others. And it calls for us to be mindful of the emotional and physical consequences of our actions. Sexual misconduct can take many forms, including infidelity, exploitation, or coercion. And it often results in harm not just to the individuals involved but to the broader community. Buddha's teaching on sexual conduct emphasizes the importance of love, trust, and respect in relationships. It encourages us to build connections based on mutual care and understanding, rather than self-serving desires. Famous example, the life of Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr., a leader of the American civil rights movement, is a powerful example of someone who embraced this precept. King was known for his integrity and moral leadership, which extended to his personal relationships. Although his personal life was subject to controversy, his public persona and teachings about love, equality, and respect remain a powerful example of ethical conduct. His commitment to justice and respect for the dignity of all people aligns with the spirit of this precept, showing that ethical relationships are foundational to building a just society. 4. To refrain from false speech. The fourth precept is to refrain from false speech. This includes lying, gossiping, slander, and divisive speech. Words are powerful. They can either build harmony or cause destruction. False speech disturbs peace and causes unnecessary conflict, both within ourselves and in the wider world. Buddha taught that our words should reflect honesty, kindness, and clarity. Right speech is not just about telling the truth but about speaking in a way that is compassionate and promotes understanding. The act of lying or speaking with malice creates suffering, not just for the listener, but also for the one who speaks. Famous example, the life of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, is often regarded as one of the most honest political leaders in history. Known as Honest Abe, Lincoln's commitment to truth and integrity shaped his leadership during one of the most divisive times in American history. Lincoln's ability to speak with honesty, even in difficult situations, exemplifies the power of truthful communication. His refusal to engage in deceptive or divisive speech underscores the importance of words in building trust and fostering peace. 5. To refrain from intoxicants that cloud the mind. The fifth precept is to refrain from intoxicants that cloud the mind. This precept encourages us to avoid substances that impair our judgment, awareness, and mindfulness. While it is not inherently wrong to enjoy a drink or a recreational substance, the key message here is the importance of maintaining clarity of mind and self-control. When we consume substances that alter our mental state, we risk losing our ability to make wise, ethical decisions. Buddha's teaching on intoxicants reminds us of the importance of maintaining a balanced and clear mind to fully engage in spiritual practice and ethical living. Famous example, the life of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple, is an example of someone who embraced mindfulness and clarity in his personal life and work. Jobs was known for his commitment to mental clarity and focus, and he often practiced meditation and other mindfulness techniques to keep his mind sharp. Jobs' ability to innovate and lead with clear vision exemplifies the importance of maintaining a lucid, undistracted mind, qualities that align with the fifth precept. Personal reflection. As I reflect on these 5 precepts, I realize how deeply they resonate with our modern lives. Each of these ethical guidelines is aimed at fostering a life of compassion, respect, and mindfulness. They help us avoid actions that create harm, and they encourage behaviors that promote peace and harmony, both within ourselves and in the world around us. In our busy, fast-paced world, it's easy to lose sight of these values. But when we return to these precepts, we find that they offer timeless wisdom, guidelines for living a meaningful and compassionate life. Whether we are dealing with difficult relationships, facing ethical dilemmas at work, or simply striving to improve ourselves, the 5 precepts provide a solid foundation for navigating life's challenges. By cultivating these ethical behaviors, we begin to break free from the cycle of harm and suffering. We create a life that is grounded in respect, kindness, and mindfulness, a life that is truly in alignment with the Buddha's teachings. Through the practice of the 5 precepts, we move closer to the goal of Nirvana. These precepts are not just external rules, but internal practices that guide our hearts and minds. They are a powerful way to develop virtue, wisdom, and compassion in our daily lives, ultimately leading us to freedom from suffering. As we wrap up today's exploration of the Buddha's teachings, I want to thank you for being part of this mindful journey. The principles we've discussed, the 4 Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, and the 5 Precepts, are more than just teachings. They are pathways to freedom. A freedom from suffering, from unnecessary attachments, and from the mind's endless distractions. But remember, this isn't just knowledge to accumulate, it's wisdom to live by. And it's in the practice of these teachings that we truly transform. So, take a moment today to reflect on one of the lessons we've discussed. Maybe it's the power of mindfulness, the freedom of letting go, or the practice of ethical conduct. Which one resonates most with you right now? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going and support each other in making these teachings a living reality. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Buddhist Balance. By doing so, you're not just supporting the channel. You're joining a community committed to spiritual growth, peaceful living, and mindful living. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, may you find balance, peace, and wisdom on your journey.